statements and opinions are the personal views of those speaking and those speaking only. They do not represent any employers, organizations, or anyone besides the individuals on the podcast. These statements and views represent expressed opinions formed based on our best available knowledge. They are not meant to be used as legal fact and should not be taken or used as such.
Hey folks, it's James Selesky. I'm coming to you with my first unplanned episode of Pennsylvania, the podcast dedicated to better fisheries management in Pennsylvania. And the reason for that is we've got some breaking news coming out of the Fish and Boat Hatcheries and Hatchery and Fisheries Committee meeting that took place on December 23rd. I know for a lot of you, these meetings are hard to make. They're on random weekdays at like 10 a.m. In my opinion, that's a little intentional given the lack of transparency we've seen from Fish and Boat surrounding a lot of the stocking issues and fisheries management issues in the past. But anyway, for those of you that couldn't attend, a number of us who, really pay close attention to the state's stocking practices and management practices did attend, and we had a real bombshell dropped on us. So if you would have looked at the agenda for this meeting, what you would have seen was that what they were planning on paper to discuss was the 9-inch proposal of a 9-inch minimum size regulation change for keeping trout. That is going to be voted on the January 26th commissioners meeting. You would have seen that there was going to be a presentation with an overview of the brook trout stocking policy from staff. And then you would have seen that there was a presentation on some fisheries management issues related to the Delaware River watershed and some of that area of the state. So that on paper, what was supposed to be discussed, those issues were discussed, and I'll cover some of that at the end of the podcast in regards to the minimum size change and the brook trout stocking policy. But what was not on the agenda and was kind of hidden, tucked in towards the end of the presentation, was we found out that Executive Director Timothy Schaeffer, who was just given shiny new power to unilaterally make decisions to stock Class A streams that meet some internal supposed criteria, used his shiny new executive power right out of the gate here to propose 13 streams to make stocking exemptions on that are Class A. So that was a shock to all of us, and just for a little bit of reference or context, from what I could find online, there's only been 12 Class A stream stocking exemptions in the past 5 years. So you're talking about an executive director who was just given the ability to unilaterally grant exemptions if he claims they adhere to preset criteria, who, is right away coming out with 13. So you got to take a look at that and take a look at Tim Schaeffer's, fraudulent statements to the public on the nature of these hatchery fish that has been covered by ABC 27. You got to look at his behavior on Freeman Run, and you got to look at his refusal to reform the, financially wasteful, hatchery program that's currently destroying the Fish Commission's finances, in my opinion. And you got to look at all that context and think, now this guy's got the power to start granting, stocking exemptions for Class A's willy-nilly, and he's actually doing it. So this is bad, folks. In my opinion, this is really bad. So this was unexpected, and this is something that anglers in the state of Pennsylvania really need to know about, and soon. We have less than 1 month till reportedly he's going to grant these exemptions, is the way that it was framed in the January 26th meeting. So how does this executive director exemption process work? Well, there's supposed to be a criteria that, outlines Class A streams that are, where it's quote unquote okay to stock over. And, we've already seen that criteria bent a bit, in my opinion. Because on Freeman Run, one of the, which is now has an exemption or is getting an exemption, One of the things that's supposed to stop stocking in a stream like that is the language says a component of native brook trout. Well, on the survey of Section 4 of Freeman Run, there were in fact 2 native brook trout found, and that easily satisfies a component of native brook trout. So we're already seeing this internal criteria for Class A exemptions get ignored and twisted, in my opinion. And now Tim Schaeffer is coming out with 13, more, 5 of which are new and 8 of which are renewals. So, this is a great cause for concern. And it's, I kind of have my own thoughts and beliefs about kind of a sleepy meeting before Christmas, not putting it on the agenda, under a month, kind of till this stuff gets rolled out in the New Year's, everyone's kind of busy. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it obviously, you could have just put it on the agenda. But, in my opinion, I think they knew they could have, and I think they would have gotten a lot of outrage, and maybe that's why they didn't. I don't know. But either way, during this same meeting, where he declared now that he's going to make 13, PA Fish and Boat declared he's going to make 13 stocking exemptions, there was an angler survey. And as some of you may have seen John Arway, previous Fish and Boat executive director, point out online, the declaring 13 exemptions for stocking Class A streams went heavily counter to what the angler survey presented in this same very meeting showed. And this survey, the 2 take-home points, in my opinion, were 58% of all trout anglers, so that's stocked and wild, said in this survey that they wanted to see stocked trout put over significant populations of wild trout, either ceased or moved elsewhere. So you have a mandate from the majority of trout anglers saying do not stock over significant populations of wild trout, and then just minutes later in the same meeting, you've got PA Fish and Boat rolling out Executive Director Schaeffer's 13 exemptions running in the opposite direction. So in my opinion, that's ignoring a mandate from the anglers on that. Second, we just, our last episode about, loss of stream access to posting, and, we talked about anglers all around the state sounding the alarm bells about shrinking access without replacement from PA Fish and Boat. Well, guess what? PA Fish and Boat's own internal survey found access was a limiting factor, and a big one in a lot of anglers' opinions. So the anglers, again, are telling PA Fish and Boat, stop stocking over wild trout and start protecting the future of our stream access amid the loss of it. And again, Tim Schaeffer and, is just focused on stocking Class A streams, it seems. If that's not concerning enough, it came to my attention after the meeting that a certain pay-for-play private trout club, making money off of stocking hatchery fish, does own property on a few of these stream sections, and a decent amount of them in these exemptions. So to be totally transparent, I don't know if this club, if their physical property, the parcels they own, I haven't been able to verify if this club is if their property is contained within these exceptions or not. But I think PA Fish and Boat, if that was part of their process, if let's say that this private trout club is the land or the properties receiving these exemptions, which I haven't been able to verify yet, if that's the case and Tim Schaeffer's making these exemptions on their property and didn't disclose that these exemptions are for a business in those locations, if that is the case and we find that out down the line, again, I don't know yet, but if that's the case, that is a huge red flag if this is being done for a pay-for-play trout club and he's not disclosing that on the exemptions. So, you can just see this is wrought with issues. And anglers out there have to think about, we're kind of at a point in the road here where we got to think about, in my opinion, what do we want angling and conservation to be like in this state going forward? Because like I said, we're losing access. There's no plans to significantly fiscally or ecologically reform the trout stocking program. And it looks to me like Tim Schaeffer is moving the ball in the other direction, and fast. So, folks, this brings us to this week's action alert. And we've got a little bit less than a month to raise hell about this. And Tim Schaeffer does have people that he answers to, and that would be Governor Josh Shapiro and the House and Senate Game and Fisheries Committees. So I'm going to put some emails for those three entities in the show notes. And folks, if you don't like this, if this is counter to the way you want our resources managed, or if it doesn't sit well with you that Tim Schaeffer is ignoring essentially a mandate from the anglers, attained from their own internal survey, then you got to email these people and say it's time to get Tim Schaeffer out. Enough time on the hot seat. We know everyone has been disappointed in him for years. He's spent us into oblivion on stock trout. He's ignored access issues. He's made openly false and fraudulent statements, on camera in Senate hearings. It's been reported on in the media. Freeman Run, there's been, all kinds of speculation about, special interest groups. And then, we've got that same question popping up here again. Who does this guy work for? It sure as hell ain't the anglers in Pennsylvania. Take 2-3 minutes and tell his supervisors to get him the hell out of there. All right, folks? If you want better management in Pennsylvania, we got to get this guy out of here. He is not on our team. He's not doing it for the resource. He's not doing it for the general angling public. And it looks really bad right now. It's going to look even worse if we confirm that, these stream sections do indeed belong to a pay-for-play club, and he didn't disclose that in this meeting. So that's about it for the, the breaking news on the new unfortunate stocking exemptions being planned. Moving on, we've got a little bit of coverage of the 9-inch minimum proposed limit. This was the other part of the meeting, and it was proposed to up the minimum size requirement to 9 inches to keep trout, and that was reportedly to protect native brook trout. Now, I guess it's better than nothing, but I took issue with a couple pieces of this proposed 9-inch minimum. So, PA Fish and Boat said that they are trying to protect brook trout, and that 99% of brook trout or something like that are smaller than 9 inches. I don't know if it's true or not, but I can tell you in certain watersheds, that's definitely not true. And, I think in certain watersheds where you do have a number of large individuals who are migratory and go through these stock downstream sections, you really got to consider if you're letting people keep brook trout in that, 9 to, 12 inch category, what percentage of that watershed's reproduction are you affecting? As we know, larger fecund females carry a higher egg mass. And after a drought, when these streams dry up completely, these streams, when they get water back in them again, they rely on, bigger individuals coming into the system and, spawning and getting that stream back online again. So if you're looking to protect brook trout, it's a novel idea. Again, I'm not a fisheries scientist, but you could just protect brook trout. You could make it a species level protection and, not a length protection. And you could also, not have these brook trout targeted by slot limits designed to grow larger brown trout, which is what the current 9-inch minimum that's proposed is probably going to wind up doing in 1 or 2 watersheds. So, that's the what's proposed. That's what's going to be voted on the 26th, and you got my take on it. The other thing was the brook trout stocking policy. Again, which is I don't know why our policy is that we stock hatchery brook trout over native brook trout. Obviously that causes genetic pollution. But they did a presentation of where they're stocking hatchery brook trout over native brook trout, and where they are stocking hatchery brook trout that does not contain native brook trout. And the take home was that it looks like their strategy is they're really trying to avoid stocking brook trout in the north central, Potter, Clinton, Tioga, that kind of area. And then they're actually stocking over a significant amount of wild brook trout in the northeastern area of the state, and also in kind of the south central, some of the areas around Harrisburg, that kind of thing. So I'm not going to cover the Delaware River issue too much. There was some concerns about, striper recruitment, which I think is something that we're seeing everywhere, unfortunately, or at least around this part of the Mid-Atlantic. So there wasn't great news out of that. But overall, I hope you guys will just take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and just fire off some emails. I mean, it's time to get Tim Schaeffer out of here, in my opinion. This guy's a dud, and he's definitely not, he's not here for the resource. He's not here for the anglers and the public. He's ignoring his own internal survey. I don't know who he's here for. So coming up in Pennsylvania in the next few weeks, we've got some great guests lined up to talk about some exciting topics in fisheries management. A couple of them are household names you're going to recognize. A couple I wanted to get on the podcast since the beginning. So got that scheduled, and hopefully you all tune back in and enjoy it. All right. Hope everyone had a good holiday.